Across the ages, violent executions have stood as stark symbols of power, control, and societal norms. From public hangings to beheadings, these methods were often intended to instill fear and control. Some executions became infamous for their shocking cruelty and the gruesome spectacle they created. The breaking wheel, execution. Breaking wheel is medieval instrument of death was not only designed to end a life, but to drag it out in unbearable torment, leaving behind a legacy of terror etched into the memories of those who witnessed it. The condemned faced not just death, but a slow, methodical destruction of their body and soul. Known also as the Catherine wheel, this horrific device was reserved for the most severe crimes, such as murder or grand robbery. But its purpose extended beyond punishment. It was a public spectacle of pain, crafted to instill fear in anyone who might consider stepping out of line. Across Europe and beyond, the wheel became infamous, leaving trails of mangled bodies and shattered minds in its wake. The breaking wheel itself was deceptively simple in appearance, often resembling a wagon wheel with thick, sturdy spokes. But its design had a singular, brutal purpose: to crush human flesh and bone beyond recognition. The victim, stripped of dignity and often clothing, was tied to the wheel, limbs stretched unnaturally along the spokes. The executioner, wielding a heavy iron bar or even the wheel itself, would systematically shatter each limb, starting with the legs. With each sickening strike, bones splintered like brittle wood, the sound echoing across the gathered crowd. The screams of the condemned pierced the air, their agony laid bare for all to see. This was not an execution. It was a ritual of suffering. Sometimes, jagged pieces of wood or spikes were placed beneath the victim, driving deep into flesh with every blow. The process was precise, deliberate. Executioners, trained in the art of delivering pain, ensured that the condemned remained alive for as long as possible, their body a canvas of mutilation. Legs, arms, ribs, nothing was spared. When the victim's screams grew faint, the crowd would often jeer, demanding the torment continue. The breaking wheel wasn't carried out behind closed doors. Thousands gathered at scaffold sites to witness the gruesome display. Children, elders, men, and women alike stood shoulder to shoulder, staring as the execution unfolded. For the authorities, this was a tool not only of punishment but of control, a grim deterrent to all who watched. The sight of a body crushed beyond repair, writhing in pain as life slipped away, burned itself into the minds of the crowd. Few could look away, though many wished they could. Death on the wheel was neither swift nor merciful. Victims often lingered for hours, their bodies grotesquely twisted, their shattered limbs rendering them incapable of even the simplest movement. Shock and blood loss were slow to claim them, and many succumbed instead to dehydration, exposure, or infection. In some cases, the process lasted days, the condemned left conscious but immobile, tied to the wheel and exposed to the elements. Birds and scavengers often descended on the bodies, picking at wounds even before life had fled. One infamous account from 1786 describes the gruesome fate of Heinrich Doller. His execution, meant to be quick, was horribly botched. The first intended death blow, a strike to the chest, failed to crush him. Still alive, Doller endured the breaking of every limb, his cries echoing for hours. Even as his shattered body was hoisted aloft for display, he clung to life, writhing in unbearable agony. He lingered for 6 excruciating hours, conscious until death finally came. Such scenes were not uncommon, and for the victims, death was often more a release than a punishment. Though the breaking wheel is most often associated with Europe, its reach extended far beyond. In French Louisiana, runaway slaves who defied their masters faced its horrors, with their mutilated bodies left for days as a warning to others. In Scotland, it was used sparingly but with similar brutality, as in the case of Robert Weir, executed in 1603. In parts of India and Russia, the wheel became an infamous symbol of state power, its use tailored to the most brutal of crimes and rebellions. Its infamy seeped even into religious law. St. Catherine of Alexandria, sentenced to die on the wheel, is said to have caused the device to shatter at her touch, sparing her its torment before her eventual beheading. Her story turned the wheel into a symbol of martyrdom and divine defiance, but it could not erase the thousands of real lives it destroyed. By the 19th century, as societies moved toward less torturous methods of execution, the breaking wheel fell out of favour. But its horrors were not easily forgotten. The accounts of its use, from the cold precision of the executioners to the pitiful wails of the condemned, remain etched in historical records. It is a stark reminder of how far humanity has gone in the name of justice and deterrence. But the horrors of the breaking wheel are only the beginning. Across the lands, another punishment awaited, one so gruesome, so methodically cruel, it became a symbol of ultimate betrayal. To face it was to endure not just death, but a ritual of suffering so horrifying it shattered the spirit of entire nations. Stay with us as we journey into the grim heart of medieval England to uncover the chilling tale of drawing and quartering, a punishment reserved for traitors, where agony was drawn out to its absolute limits. What horrors awaited those who dared defy the crown? Keep watching, for the darkest depths of human cruelty are yet to be revealed. Drawing and quartering execution. In medieval England, there was one punishment that struck terror into the hearts of the people, a punishment so cruel and brutal that it became a symbol of the monarchy's absolute power. This punishment was reserved for those accused of treason, the gravest crime a person could commit against the crown. To betray the king or queen was to invite a fate so horrific that it became infamous throughout history, a fate so dreadful that it was said to make even the bravest of men tremble. This punishment was not a simple execution. It was designed to be a public spectacle, meant to terrorize everyone who might consider defying the crown. Treason was seen as a betrayal of the entire kingdom, and the punishment for it was brutal, involving not just death but also extreme humiliation and suffering that would haunt the condemned's memory, even after death. The monarchy made it clear that no one was safe from such an end if they dared challenge the king's authority. When someone was convicted of treason, their final days were filled with agony and dread. They were locked away in dark, cold dungeons, awaiting their fate. The cells were often damp and foul-smelling, a reflection of the hopelessness that gripped those held within. Some prisoners, broken by the mental torment, would refuse to speak, while others might be driven to madness, haunted by the knowledge of the cruel death that awaited them. Once the sentence was passed, they were dragged through the streets, bound and helpless, as the people watched from the sidelines. The crowds would gather, shouting insults, throwing filth, and mocking the condemned. The prisoner's suffering became a form of entertainment for the masses. The prisoner would be dragged behind a horse or placed on a wooden hurdle, which, though slightly less painful, was still a humiliating experience. The point was to break the person's spirit before they even reached the execution site, stripping away their dignity and humanity in the eyes of all. The condemned was paraded through the streets like a trophy of the king's justice, a cruel signal to anyone who dared to rebel. At the gallows, a formal declaration of the prisoner's crimes was read aloud to the crowd. This was often a lengthy account, describing in detail the treasonous actions of the condemned. Sometimes the condemned would speak, but most often they would remain silent, too terrified or too defiant to show any emotion. The execution began with hanging, but that was only the beginning of the horrors that awaited. The prisoner was hanged until they were barely alive. The rope would be cut, and the victim would fall, still conscious, into the hands of the executioner, whose job was not to let the prisoner die easily. The true nightmare began then. The executioner would cut open the prisoner's stomach, removing their internal organs and holding them up for the crowd to see. The gruesome act was done slowly, with the executioner taking his time to ensure that every moment of agony was felt. This was believed to rid the body of the treasonous thoughts that had led the person to betray the crown. The organs would be thrown into a fire, burning as a final act of punishment, with the flames symbolizing the purging of the corruption that had led to the prisoner's downfall. But the cruelty didn't end there. The prisoner's genitals would be severed, and their body would be dismembered, quartered into 4 parts. These body parts would be boiled and salted, then put on display for all to see. The intention was to make the gruesome sight impossible to ignore, to show the people the cost of treason and rebellion. The head would be removed, often displayed on a spike for days or even weeks, a grotesque trophy of the monarchy's power. This public display was meant to send a clear and terrifying message to anyone who might even think of betraying the crown. Such was the fate of all traitors. One of the most shocking stories is that of Edmund Jennings, a Catholic priest executed in the 16th century. Even as his body was being disemboweled, Jennings continued to pray, astonishing the executioner and the crowd with his strength and faith. His words of prayer were heard by all, even as the executioner continued his grisly work. Jennings's ability to maintain his composure and faith in the face of such unimaginable pain was a testament to the strength of the human spirit, but it was also a reminder of the depths of cruelty to which the crown could sink. For centuries, this punishment was used to strike fear into the people of England. It was a public display of the power of the crown and a warning to anyone who might consider betrayal. The sight of a traitor's dismembered body hanging on display was meant to remind everyone of the consequences of challenging the monarch. While the practice was eventually abolished, the gruesome stories of those who suffered such a fate still serve as a testament to the brutal history of treason and its price. The breaking wheel and drawing and quartering were incredibly cruel punishments in medieval times, meant to cause extreme pain and fear. They were not just ways to kill someone, but also to scare others into obedience. These punishments stand as a grim symbol of how harsh justice was back then.